Hey guys, welcome back to Big Riff Energy. It is Ghost at the Gallows album released week at last. I started working on that record 3.5 years ago, and I am so ready for it to be out of my hands and out into the world and for everybody to hear it. The response has been killer so far. I've mentioned I try to sort of ignore that. I don't think it's super healthy, but sometimes it's unavoidable. But I will say I really appreciate all the kind things that people have been saying about it so far. I can't wait for everyone else to hear it. Yeah, we're playing some shows with Wake and Pallbearer the weekend after the record is released. Get your tickets at spiritadrift.com/tour. I'm going to be putting out quite a bit of, I would say, album-related content on this channel. I did a track-by-track rundown that's pretty unconventional and had a lot of fun with that. Doing some other stuff. Me and Tom are showing some back-and-forth guitar solo action, and I'm playing like my 5 favorite riffs from the album and stuff like that. So that's all lined up on this channel. If you're interested in that sort of thing, go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to go ahead and start with some fan mail before we kick off into the topics at hand. I will say, first of all, on Sunday, I taught my first guitar lesson ever, and that was a direct result of this podcast. It was really cool. Shout out to Sam. I enjoyed it. I haven't felt that good in a long time, to be honest. I really felt great about it, and I got a profound sense of satisfaction from it. I mentioned that my first guitar teacher, a guy named Ray Sales, passed away back in January. And on Sunday, I just sort of felt like I was carrying forth a really important tradition or something. It was cool. It was a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm officially teaching guitar lessons on Skype. I didn't know how I was going to like it, so I wasn't sure. But yeah, hit me up for rates and availability. BIGRIFFENERGY@gmail.com. Had a lot of fun with it. And on the topic of guitars, I got an email from Mark from Louisville, Kentucky. Mark says, I was just curious about the guitars you've used over the years. I know you guys are using Les Pauls now, but what would you say is a favorite guitar you've owned? There's multiple parts to this question, but I'll start there. If I had to pick one, this is my favorite guitar I've owned. It is a Dunable R2D2 in black Limba. This is the most recent guitar that Sasha made for me. It's got EMG pickups, one knob, pick switch, or pickup selector, pick switch. I just made that up. Yeah, it's just a beautiful piece of art, man. It's a real heavy, beautiful, solid piece of wood. I love it. I love it, man. Yeah, that's my favorite guitar. I have a 1979 Les Paul Standard that I came across that has a total Gary Rossington vibe. It is like totally stained with cigarette smoke and just reeks of cigarettes. Tell somebody was playing it in a bar, you know. I love that guitar. The first time I picked up that guitar, I played I Shall Return pretty much from start to finish. And live, I'm playing a modern Les Paul Custom, which I really dig. I got inspired to get one of those from John Neutveit from Dissection on that Rebirth of Dissection DVD or whatever. He's playing a Les Paul Custom, and there's something really badass about that. So next part of the question, are there any you wish you still had that you lost along the way? Yes. When I was younger, I had a Gibson Voodoo Explorer. Now that's not the guitar in question, but I traded that for the guitar in question. I had a friend named Matt who was going to boot camp and subsequently got shipped off to Iraq during like the first big wave, you know. I mentioned him on the hardcore episode. I shaved my head when I heard Minor Threat, and it was also partially in solidarity with this guy, Matt. But he had this Gibson SG, I think it was technically a deluxe, but there was nothing like it. It was neon blue, like even the back of the neck. The whole guitar was finished like super bright blue. And it had a perloid white pick guard, 3 mini humbuckers, nickel, and a big old Maestro tremolo. I think there were only 500 of them made. And so when he was going off to Iraq, I traded him this Gibson Explorer for that guitar. And some really notorious, kind of horrible events occurred, and that guitar got stolen. And I never could figure out who stole it, and I don't know where it is. I never saw it again. And there's only 500 of them, apparently. So if I could get one back, I would get that one back. And I would still do some bad things to whoever took it. No, I wouldn't. I'm kidding. If you're listening to this, just give me my guitar back, please. Side note to that, too. Matt came back from a tour of duty one time and brought me sacks full of currency that had Saddam Hussein's face on it. Allegedly, some Marines blew up a bank vault over there in Baghdad, allegedly, and took some souvenirs. Okay, last part of the question. He's asking about this red SG that I have, if there's a story behind it. Not really. You know, that's a 2017. I had some Gibsons growing up that were hunks of shit. Gibson was making hunks of shit for a while. We all know it. And I think 2016, 17 was sort of the comeback. That's when I started noticing they were getting really nice again. And 2017 happened to be the first year ever that I was sort of making some money playing music and touring and stuff. So yeah, I just got on Reverb while I was on tour, feeling frisky one day, and I bought the red SG 2017, and I got the same model in Pelham Blue. And there's not really a story with the red one. I really like it. I recorded all of Forge Your Future with that one guitar. Sounds great. The pickups are killer sounding, really easy to play. There is a cool story with the blue one. I ended up selling that guitar in Phoenix. I met this guy in a mall parking lot, and the guitar was for his son, who I would say was like 10 or 12 years old, probably, let's say 12 years old. And that blue guitar happened to be set up in C# standard, which is master of reality tuning. They didn't know that. I hand the guitar to the kid, and he goes to start playing it, and I'm like, this is going to suck, because most kids aren't good at guitar. And especially nowadays, but the kid started playing the main riff from Children of the Grave from Master of Reality. Even though he had no idea, the guitar was already in that tuning. An amazing moment. I looked at his dad like, holy shit, man. And his dad just kind of nodded at me, you know. I almost wanted to just give the kid the guitar, but I didn't. I took their money. So that's the story with the blue SG that's no longer with me. The red one's great. Like I said, I wrote Forge Your Future on that guitar. I wrote like almost half of our new album on that guitar. I used it a little bit on the new album, but yeah, I tracked all of Forge Your Future with it, and I will keep it forever. Okay, I've been nervous about doing this podcast, because I want to get it right. And there's a lot going on in my mind here. I was definitely planning on doing an episode about failure, which seems like depressing a little bit, but it's not. Like, I think so few people in my position, or so few like social media influencers or whatever, half-ass public figure type people, so few of them are really giving an honest representation of their lives, myself included. You know, when you're looking at somebody's Instagram, for the most part, you're seeing a highly curated, filtered version of reality, where you're only seeing the coolest stuff they're doing, the best stuff they're doing, the happiest moments that they have, the most epic wins of their lives. And a lot of times with some of these bigger influencer type people, it's staged. A lot of it is like full-blown staged. Like, they'll make you think they're in Maui and they're in their backyard in Jacksonville, Florida or something. So you're just, you know, there's been talk for a long time about these unattainable physical, unattainable, like feminine bodies or images. And we've all been aware of that for a long time, models being touched up on Photoshop and stuff like that. But there's like even more insidious version of that going on now. That's not just isolated to any one group. It's everybody. We're all being presented with, unattainable lives that half the time don't even exist. And no one is being upfront about the uglier parts of their lives, the struggles, the failures, and that sort of thing. And I was sort of struggling with this a couple of weeks ago. I was just feeling like old and irrelevant and like past my prime and sort of blacklisted or all kinds of stuff. And I got in the car and I just went for a drive out here in the woods. I turned on NPR and I laughed because they were talking about failure. They were talking to like college professors and all kinds of different people about failure and how different approaches and different reactions to failure can yield different results and how it sort of can be a crucial learning tool. And that's the way I look at it. I'm a sucker for cliched motivational quotes. And one that I heard recently that I really like is that success is standing on top of a mountain of failure rather than being buried underneath a mountain of failure. And I like that a lot. So I really wanted to talk about that. And I fail every single day. And the more you do something, the tougher you get and the better you get at it. And the more of an ability you gain to learn from it and to not be as devastated by it. So I definitely wanted to talk about that and get honest about that just because I don't think anybody is. And then William Friedkin passed away. I would have to put him in the top 10, maybe top 5 most significant, influential figures in my life as a guy trying to make meaningful, timeless art. Friedkin is one of the biggest influences in my life in that regard. And just in general, just life in general. So I knew I'd have to talk about him. And I started thinking about Friedkin, and I realized failure is a huge part of his story and what he did with failure and what failure did to him. So I'm just going to talk about both of them. I'll start by talking about William Friedkin. And I've been getting excited, but also nervous thinking about this episode with all the connections and stuff. You know, that was a big theme in his work. The interconnectedness of the human experience and all the weird coincidences. And he would call it, grace notes, just little subliminal stuff that happens to us that has a significance that we're unaware of until later. And that's all present in this conversation if I can get through it without fucking it up. So I saw The Exorcist when I was about the same age that Linda Blair is in the movie, 12, 13 years old, somewhere around there. And I told a brief version of that story on this podcast already, so I won't get too into that. But it had an impact on me, obviously. That movie has an impact on people. It came out 50 years ago. We're still talking about it. And when you're 12 or 13, I don't think you really have the capacity to appreciate all of the profound, archetypal, really meaningful, heavy subject matter that's going on in that movie. A lot of which Friedkin is just expertly illustrating just through camera movement and stuff like that. And I'll get into that. But what you can appreciate at 12 or 13 is what I would call fireworks. The stuff that's like obviously shocking and shocking on a level that is unprecedented, especially at that time. But I would argue still to this day, nothing has touched it in cinema. And yeah, that's what hit me initially. But those fireworks, those big obvious like moments of shock and awe that happen in the movie and that happen on albums or, different mediums of art, those things will grab you initially. But that's not why we're talking about it 50 years later. We're talking about it because of the depth, There's depth psychology, Carl Jung, right? The shadow, exploring the shadow and exploring archetypes and the nature of man and what it means to be alive and why we're here and all that. I started sort of kicking a term around in my mind, depth artists, right? There's like Marvel movies, and then there's Friedkin. There's the Macarena, and there's Beethoven or Pink Floyd, right? There's like very superficial product that gets cranked out, and then there's depth art. And it's two very different things. They almost have nothing in common. And I'm only interested in depth artists, and Friedkin is the level of his depth is about as deep as it gets. I saw The Exorcist as a kid. I didn't know who William Friedkin was. Didn't care. I ended up reading the book when I got a little bit older, written by William Peter Blatty, who passed away a few years ago. And I wasn't really clued in on Friedkin until, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. I got to bring him up again. Dave, $20 spin, Dave had read Friedkin's autobiography. I have it right here, The Friedkin Connection. I can't recommend it enough. And Dave was really blown away by the book, and I either saw him post about it or we talked about it. And, he's like, you have to read this, man. And I have to explain part of the relationship between Dave and myself. If you made a Venn diagram of our tastes and what we're really passionate about, in the middle, which is this type of stuff that he's always recommending to me and vice versa, are these, I hesitate to even call them artists, but they are. There's a connotation with the word artist of pretension and bullshit, and I can't stand that. That stuff makes me sick. Almost as sick as people who are like mediocre at something. Most of those type of quote unquote artists are actually mediocre, and all they do is talk and think, and they don't actually put the work in or create anything of substance. The artists that Dave and I like, on the surface, they're not artistic type people. They're sort of hard asses, completely devoid of pretense, hard upbringings. A lot of them carry guns around. I watched this Schwarzenegger documentary where they talked about Milius, who directed Conan, and how everybody knew he had a 45 on him at all times. These are the kind of artists that Dave and I like. They're sort of unhinged. They don't abide by the rules. Nobody can tell them shit. They're cantankerous. And even though they pretend not to, they have a depth of passion and emotion and soul that is almost limitless. And these are the guys that inspire me. Phil Lynott would be a random example. He's out drinking, beating the shit out of people, raising hell. And if you listen to his music, there is a deeply sensitive, emotional, profound thinker beneath all of that hard exterior. Those are the kind of guys I like. And Friedkin is just about the living embodiment of that. One of the most extreme examples of that I've ever been aware of. All of the best artists, in my mind, had a need to be transported from their circumstances as a young person, a need to transcend things and escape things. And once they become people on the quest to create that kind of transcendental art, they have a real strong ability to create stuff that allows other people to go on a journey or escape from their circumstances for a moment. And Friedkin is one of those guys. He had a really hard upbringing. I wrote Sorcerer's Fate about this guy. And if you read this book or listen to the audiobook or whatever, watch the documentary Leap of Faith as well. It's just him talking about The Exorcist for an hour and a half. That might sound boring. Believe me, it's not. If you educate yourself on this guy and then you listen to our song Sorcerer's Fate, I didn't even try to hide what the song is about. And the song's inspired by him, but it's really more about the relationship between being a human being in the human experience and how that connects to trying to make something important or trying to make something timeless or that moves other people and that is an expression of your human experience that connects you with others, right? It's all about that. And Friedkin recounts going into a movie theater as a child, not really like a young child, and not really knowing what's about to happen. It's the room is pitch black, and he hears some kind of noise, which he later found out is the curtains parting, and then boom, a light comes on, and he was just transported out of his circumstances. You know, his grandparents were Ukrainian Jews that were basically kicked out of Europe for being Jewish, came over to the States, and he grew up in a really harsh environment, you know, Chicago back in the 40s and 50s, broke, didn't have any connections or anything like that. And yeah, his first experience in a movie theater just rocked his world. It just took him out of that. And he later had an experience, you know, he was moved by that experience of witnessing a movie in the theaters the first time, but he didn't really know how to process it or what to make of it. And I would compare that in my own life to maybe hearing like Creedence and Leonard Skinner and like Jimi Hendrix, and just being just blown away by those sounds and that experience, but not really even knowing what it is, or not even ever considering that I could be involved in that, right? Other than just a person experiencing it as a fan. And when Friedkin got a little older, he saw Citizen Kane. And that was the moment where he was like, I don't know how to do this or what they're doing or what the hell that was, but I have to do that with my life. And that to me was hearing Black Sabbath. It's just, it's so important in life to be understood by another person and to understand another person. That's one of the most comforting things that we can experience as human beings. And one of my biggest struggles in life, and I think it's because of a lot of my own hangups, is 99% of people that I encounter in this life, I don't understand them. And it's frightening, you know, and it's very isolating. And I feel the same way. I feel like 99% of people that encounter me don't really actually understand me. And I think everybody feels that way to a certain extent. And, you know, we have significant others and family and friends that we like to think we understand them and they understand us, and we can comfort each other through life. However, there are things that are deeply personal, such as devoting your whole life to trying to create art with some kind of profound meaning that's real, that maybe your significant other or your family or friends or whoever, they can understand it to a certain extent, but you know that because they're not doing it, it's hard to really convey certain things to them. And then I read a book like this autobiography of William Friedkin, and this guy I've never met, I understand him, he understands me wholeheartedly. There's nothing more comforting than that to me, because this way of life and this path that I've chosen, it's not easy, and few paths are, right? But there's just so much at stake sometimes emotionally and personally, and it can be really painful and difficult. And that's part of why I'm so obsessed with watching documentaries about people like William Friedkin or reading autobiographies. Anybody that has devoted their life to trying to make meaningful art, I will eat that up. Whether I'm really a fan of their stuff or not is insignificant, because I'm trying to be comforted, and I'm trying to be understood, encouraged, validated, you know. And this book, The Friedkin Connection, was one of the most validating, encouraging, and comforting experiences I've ever had, man. And I became just really enamored with this guy. Watched Q&As and interviews, and, you know, he did the Mark Maron podcast. And I know this guy, and I know him through his art and through his personality and all sorts of stuff. It got me thinking about some of the things that we have in common, and just the whole deal, man. It's all I think about all the time, is this pursuit of like living a life of meaning and creating something that matters to somebody, including myself, you know. But one of the questions I just get destroyed with, I just did like a really extensive interview cycle for our new album. And one of the questions that just like it batters me, man. No offense to anybody listening to this that's asked me this. I get why you asked me this, but it's this whole thing of like, well, your early stuff was doom, and now you're playing something that's more like traditional metal. Which there's two assumptions being made right there, just right off the bat, you know. And then it's just some form of a question of something along the lines of like, how'd you get from this to that? Or what inspired you to get from this to that? And it's such an impossible question to answer. It's a kind of like a pedestrian question. Again, no offense. I'm really sorry. Because Friedkin would say in Q&As all the time, you're not about to ask me that pedestrian question, are you? And I want to say that sometimes, because would you ask William Friedkin, well, you know, you made a movie about two cops trying to bust a international heroin ring. Why was your next movie about a girl that's possessed? How'd you get from the cop movie to the possession? I thought you were always just going to make movies about cops, you know? It's just there's a dissonance between the artist and the person asking the artist about the art. Right. And it is what it is. I'm not judging anybody or anything like that. But, you know, Friedkin would always talk about The Exorcist and say, I wasn't thinking of it in terms of a horror movie. And I always heard him saying, The Exorcist is not a horror movie. That's not what he was saying. And I just watched a recent Q&A with him where he said, you know, of course, The Exorcist is a horror movie. Obviously, it's a horror movie. But he wasn't thinking in those terms. He wasn't thinking in those terms when he made The French Connection. He wasn't thinking in those terms when he made his greatest artistic success and biggest commercial failure, the movie Sorcerer, which I'll talk about later. Friedkin was the kind of guy that was compelled by deep, profound questions about the human experience. One of them, I don't even know if it's a question, just thinking about the human experience. One of them was his belief that every person has in them the capacity for great good and great evil. And is fascinated by the circumstances that will push a person in one direction or the other. And he has the tendency in himself for good, but he also has wanted to literally kill people at different times in his life. I watched an interview where he was bullied viciously by this guy in Chicago when he was 13, and one day he realized Friedkin's experience on this earth would be a lot easier and a lot better if that guy wasn't around, and so he decided to start smashing the guy's head into the concrete. And he said he doesn't know what stopped him from killing the guy, but just exploring that part of human nature, that we all have the capacity for good and we all have the capacity for evil. And another one of his favorite things to think about was the mysteries of fate. He was a believer that there's very little that we can do to affect our fate and affect our destiny. A lot of it's biological or cosmic or just out of our hands, circumstances, you know. And the mystery of faith, right? Believing in something greater than yourself without evidence. And just, yeah, faith. He was a man of faith. He said he made The Exorcist as a believer and that the movie wouldn't be any good if it was made by a skeptic. I totally agree with that. And, you know, I did my Jesus versus the devil riff off. So Team Jesus gets some of the best, most evil riffs ever made. And in cinema, Team Jesus gets The Exorcist, which to this day is one of the most evil, I would say it's the most evil movie ever made. But that's a different story. So Friedkin, you know, he's not, when he made The French Connection, he's not thinking about, I'm going to make this genre of movie. He's thinking about those bigger questions that I just mentioned. And, you know, he took his experience in television and making documentaries. Another thing I feel deeply in common with this man is he was just learning on the job. He was, You don't sit there and think and prepare and procrastinate and wait for the stars to align and wait for the muse to enter you and wait for some divine inspiration. You can tap into all of those things, but you have to fucking get up off your ass and go do it and not worry about it, failure and all of that. You just fucking do it. So, The French Connection was a groundbreaking film because it was kind of the first foray, at least in Hollywood, into a documentary film style in a fictional picture, right? And Friedkin came up in television, didn't go to film school, had a couple lessons here and there, but really just learned as he was doing it. And his first big film was a documentary about a guy that was going to be executed who Friedkin believed was innocent. And the film actually got the guy off of death row and eventually exonerated. So, right out of the gate, this man's films are having some profound impact on the world around him, right? When he made The French Connection, he just wanted to explore those themes, that gray area. There hadn't really been a cop movie before that explored cops who were sort of in that gray area, kind of racist and violent and flawed at the least, And he sort of inadvertently invented the buddy cop movie, and he sort of inadvertently invented an idea that would be copied by a lot of the best filmmakers, the Coen brothers, all kinds of guys, of these characters that aren't just, it's not Superman. They're not just all the way good or all the way bad. There's a lot of gray area in there. Was he thinking in terms of, well, you made this movie, it was a cop movie. So then what happened to you to go on to make a movie about a girl being possessed and then make a movie about a truck full of nitroglycerin driving across? That would be a foolish question to ask this man. You have to understand what he's trying to do with his art form. And again, I relate to that a lot. I'm using a different medium, but I have deep shit that I have to go through and think about all the time. And that's what I'm trying to process by creating something and hopefully in turn connecting with other people. I talk about that a lot on here. Another thing I feel very much in common with Friedkin is his acknowledgement that, all artists, no matter what your medium is, we have our influences. And the influences you experience early in life are going to monumentally impact you, right? And Friedkin is unconcerned about the medium through which he's experiencing art. So he's equally influenced. His art form is a visual medium. And again, I referred to him as a depth artist, and he talks a lot about film being a big part of filmmaking being that it's a two-dimensional art form, but you have to create the illusion of three dimensions. I'm not referring to him as a depth artist in that sense, although he is, right? And he drew a lot of inspiration from paintings. I'll throw a couple of paintings up here. Painting is a two-dimensional art form that creates the illusion of depth. He talks a lot about the view of Delft by Vermeer. Throw that up. He talks a lot about, you're going to recognize this, Empire of Light by Rene Magritte. So look at that painting. If you're just listening, you can look it up at your leisure. It's obvious that his shot of Father Marin going up to the house is directly influenced by Empire of Light by Rene Magritte. Friedkin is confident enough in his abilities and his intentions as an artist that he doesn't feel this like defense mechanism type of urge to shy away from his influences. He embraces them. They had a profound impact on him. Why would you ask a guy like that to divorce himself from the art and artists that inspired him profoundly, right? And a lot of people expect musicians and artists and everybody else to shy away from, oh yeah, no, Black Sabbath really influenced that part. Black Sabbath changed my life. Why would I try to make anything that had nothing to do with that. Why would I try to pretend that a band like that didn't have a significant impact on my life and my art? I'm not interested in that. I don't give a shit if I write a riff that sounds sort of like a Tony Iommi riff. The motherfucker changed my life. He's the best riff writer ever. Obviously, I don't want to completely 100% copy anybody, and I never have. But, you know, my influences are my influences. And folks that pretend they don't have influences are full of shit, and they're just insecure, you know? So another aspect, let me mention one more painter here, Caravaggio, right? Friedkin talked about the stark lighting and, you know, the dark backgrounds and stuff. And Caravaggio was uninterested in really accurately reproducing the backgrounds of the time. It was a lot more about the figure. So look at this Caravaggio painting, and then look at this shot in The Exorcist of, can you help an old altar boy? And you will see the Caravaggio influence. Friedkin talked about the influence of music. And obviously, it's important to use music and film. The two go hand in hand. But beyond that, Friedkin would draw upon pieces of music for lessons in pacing, dynamics, climax, you know, starting quiet so that you have somewhere to go. And obviously he's drawing inspiration from other people in his own medium. Alfred Hitchcock being a huge influence. There are shots in Friedkin movies that are very transparently repurposed from Alfred Hitchcock. And, you know, some artists are just have that monumental an impact on the art form that they're going to influence people in that art form forever. Hitchcock was one of them. If you're lucky enough, you can draw from that well of inspiration and become one of those guys. And Friedkin did. And man, that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. So I have these notes. I've been all over the place with them. Fuck genre. That's a big one, right? Like, well, you made a buddy cop movie. Why'd you make a movie about a girl being possessed? That's stupid as fuck, man. That is such a dumbass question. And when applied to music, it's just as fucking stupid, right? I love AC/DC, but I ain't AC/DC. Every album's different. I'm going through something different in life when I make every album. So stop fucking asking me that. Yeah. Combining your influences to make something that is you know, you can't shake off your influences, and why would you want to? His super profound experiences with Citizen Kane, you know, mirroring my experiences with Black Sabbath. It's all there. I love this man, even though I never met him. I didn't get sad when he died because he's 87. And the type of guy that this was, it is unbelievable to me that he lived to be 87, because he was just fearless of whatever. He wanted to experience as much of life as he possibly could. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And he kept it real. He kept it real. And I'm going to get into this. First of all, I want to talk about the year 1973, because that's the year The Exorcist came out. You could argue that cinema has never gotten better than that. That's the year that Sabbath Bloody Sabbath came out. That's the year that Dark Side of the Moon came out. Houses of the Holy. You could argue that art and culture has not ever produced anything better than any of that. I don't know that I would fully agree with you. You know, I think there's moments. Master of Puppets, I think, touches into that stratosphere. I think a lot of the work that Mastodon has done has touched that level of the stratosphere. Now you have guys like Robert Eggers. He's really the only guy I can name off the top of my head that I think touches the type of work that Friedkin and John Landis and guys like that were making. And a lot of that has to do with the corporatization of art, especially in this country. Corporations own everything now. They own politicians. They own the government. And if you don't believe that, you don't know what Citizens United is or what corporate lobbying is. corporations own essentially every record label now. There's a few exceptions. Disney owns Star Wars and Marvel and everything else. So I'm going to back up and talk about Friedkin's relationship with that kind of non-art. He made a movie called Sorcerer. I have the Tangerine Dream soundtrack here behind me. He saw Tangerine Dream in a church in Europe randomly and referred to it as the music of the spheres. Look up Harmony of the Spheres if you want to know all about that. Friedkin was a believer in forces greater than himself. He was a follower of Christ. Again, Exorcist is Team Jesus. He was a God guy. I think that's part of why I really didn't get sad when he died. Let me mention my experience with The Exorcist last night before I get too deep into Sorcerer. If anybody's still listening, you might not be. I didn't get sad when Friedkin died because he believes he's still around. And why not? If that's his belief, I feel like I probably have a better chance of connecting with him now that he's in a different form than I did when he was alive. You know, I had no chance of meeting that guy. So I wasn't sad when he passed. I watched The Exorcist last night. There's a shot, the lady that plays the actress is delivering her line through the megaphone. And then we sort of see from her perspective-ish, looking out into this crowd on the campus of Georgetown in DC. The camera is zooming indiscriminately at a very slow and steady and creeping pace. And there's all these figures around. You know, I showed the View of Delft painting earlier. And we don't know what we're supposed to be looking at. And it's just life. He's just shooting what he saw. He's operating off of instinct. He referred to it as a sort of sleepwalking security. That was a Fritz Lang thing. That's how I write music. Just instinct, intuition. Conscious thinking is useless most of the time when you're trying to tap into the primal, right? So this camera is just zooming and zooming and zooming. We're like, who are we looking at? And then across the frame comes walking Father Karras. And he sort of stops. I don't know if he even comes to a full stop. And he looks in the direction of the camera, in the direction of Reagan's mother. And then he continues on. And that shot, like I've watched The Exorcist quite a few times. I don't watch it frequently because I just think it's too powerful to just kind of view casually, you know. It's in a league all its own. But I've had all kinds of reactions to the film throughout my life. The reaction that I've never had was the reaction I had yesterday where I was just like on the verge of tears that somebody could be that good at something. You know, there's few things in life that disgust me more than mediocrity and infuriate me more than mediocrity. And the creative and entertainment industries are run by people that fully embody mediocrity a lot of the time, especially at that level. The converse to that is there's nothing that gets me feeling more excited and alive and in touch with humanity than watching somebody who is really, really fucking good at something. And Friedkin, just with the movements of a camera and that one shot, said so much about the themes and the big questions about the human experience that he was trying to explore. Without saying anything, without explaining that, he's just showing you and he's letting you experience that. And Jesus Christ, it's inspiring when somebody is that good at something. So after The Exorcist made the studios $1 billion, Friedkin is one of these guys. Now he's got an Academy Award. He just made the studios $1 billion with a film that like 5 or 6 directors, the best directors, passed on because they said it's impossible. We can't get that out of a 12-year-old girl. You can't make a movie with a 12-year-old girl masturbating with a crucifix. Friedkin did it because he was fearless. And not only did he do it, and it was a complete artistic and spiritual and meaningful success, it made the studios $1 billion against all odds. They couldn't tell him shit during the whole process. He was casting whoever he wanted, you know, against their wishes. He forced everybody to start the film in Iraq. Everybody told him there was no point. He said, what do you mean? The whole movie's about fate, bringing all these people together and all these inevitable things that are happening to these people. You know how much money that guy spent going to Iraq? And he was out there hanging out with like some weird offshoot Muslim sect of like devil worshipers and stuff. It's great. You got to read his book. I'm telling you. And it worked. It all worked. This motherfucker was out of his mind and couldn't be told a single thing about his methods or anything. And it worked. It made these suits $1 billion. So now he's got free reign to do whatever he wants. He wants to make this movie called Sorcerer, that's based on a novel called The Wages of Fear. And again, we've got characters who are not good or evil or even really likable. We've got all practical effects. It's shot in a very, very realistic style, although it dips off into the sort of Magritte surrealism during some of the more memorable moments. Sorcerer was his absolute masterpiece as an artist, as a man, as a human being. He made his masterpiece and it flopped. It was an absolute fucking bomb because Star Wars came out the same weekend. And I'm not a Star Wars hater. I was obsessed with Star Wars as a kid. I still love it. But Star Wars is literal child's play, Disney bullshit compared to a movie like Sorcerer. But so much of what we do is timing, marketability. You know, none of the characters in Sorcerer would be marketable action figures. I'll just say that. Star Wars just had more marketability and the timing was better. I think Sorcerer confused a lot of people. Partially because of the title. It has nothing to do with a sorcerer. It's a bunch of criminal miscreant dudes driving a couple of trucks full of highly volatile nitroglycerin through the Amazonian rainforest, or it might be Central America. Anyway, through the rainforest, treacherous. They put a big giant truck on a rope bridge, and there was no way to do it other than to just do it, risk life and limb. He went way over budget. Because he did that on The Exorcist and he did that on The French Connection. You couldn't tell him shit. I need more money. Why? Because we have to shoot it on location. Why? Because we fucking have to. Don't ask me. I have an Academy Award, you know, just shut the fuck up and give me money, you know. So far, the strategy had worked. He was a straight up guy. The whole reason he got hooked up with The Exorcist is because he told the guy that wrote it, William Peter Blatty, that a script he was working on years earlier was basically bullshit. And the guy chased him down later in the lot and told him, I've never heard anybody be that honest at this studio ever, the whole time I've been here. The entertainment industry requires you to sell yourself out at a certain level. It does. That's not a conspiracy. You will have to compromise your integrity as a person and your integrity as an artist. And if you don't, you will suffer the consequences. And Friedkin suffered the consequences. It caught up to him. He suffered the consequences with his last film too, Killer Joe. The MPAA wanted to give him an NC-17 rating. They basically told him, you got to dismantle this film in order to get an R. He said, man, that kind of reminds me of Vietnam when all of our great military minds were telling us, we need to save Vietnam, and in order to do that, we have to destroy it first. And he said, I'm too fucking old to play that kind of game. The MPAA are a bunch of people, anonymous people, you know, secret people that are unelected. Nobody knows who they are. There's no written set of rules or anything like that that you can refer to plead your case or anything, who just arbitrarily decide the fate of art being made by people with far more imagination, determination, conviction, integrity, everything. That reminds me a lot of the music industry. There's just a lot of arbitrary fates being determined by people with not a talented or imaginative or passionate bone in their body, who are too weak to hack it as artists and who give up when they fail. That's the difference between people like that and artists. Artists stand on top of a mountain of failure rather than being buried underneath it. Man, I went off. Yeah, I relate to pouring your heart and soul into something and then it not connecting with people the way that you want it to, or the way that you had hoped for it to. And the only thing that we can control is what we do. We can't control other people's attitudes or reactions to anything. Half the time we can barely control ours. What is so inspiring and encouraging about Friedkin to me is that Sorcerer was such a failure that it ruined his life at the time. According to him. I mean, it fucking destroyed his life. All those people who were kissing his ass, calling him a genius, just, oh, you're so great, The phone stopped ringing. He stopped getting the time of day, and I've been there. I have been there. What's inspiring about it to me is this man lived to be 87. He made a lot more really good movies. He experienced life, a lot of cool life experiences. And he got to live long enough to see Sorcerer get the respect and the praise and the success that it deserved all along. What's funny, he starts this book off by listing a lot of his most monumental failures. He got approached by Prince before Prince was famous to direct a music video. Not interested. He got a piece of artwork from some guy and he thought it was pretty uncompelling and wasn't too interested in it, threw it in the trash, found out later that that piece of art could have sold for a few $1 million. He turned down a stake in the Boston Celtics because they were losing at the time. He turned down a stake in Mike Tyson because he thought he was too young. He starts his book off telling you about all his biggest failures. And the only success that matters is living a life worth living, keeping your integrity as a person and as an artist or whatever it is you're doing with your life. And he did that. And I've managed to do that so far. But I'm going to talk about some of my biggest failures because I promised that at the beginning and I want to deliver. Spirit Adrift and Gatecreeper were the first bands that I was ever in. I was in a band called Takeover and Destroy that had a moderate degree of success. So I'll take that back. I'll put those three bands together. Those were the first bands I was ever in, well into my 20s, that anybody ever gave a shit about other than me and maybe a couple of the other people directly involved. I would say if you're only counting bands that performed live, recorded, and that sort of thing, I would say I was in 25 bands before that. Every single one of those bands I wanted to be a success with everything in me. I'm not a casual person. When I get into something, obviously I get into it. It's all or nothing. Every single one of those bands failed. It wasn't a situation of like, wow, we've accomplished really all that we can accomplish. And I feel totally satisfied and it's time to move on. No, abject failure. Could not get anybody to give a shit. Couldn't get the time of day from anybody. Learning on the job. Every single one of those bands technically is a failure. Here's my biggest failure. It's easy to be fake vulnerable and fake honest. What's something that I genuinely don't want to talk about to anybody, much less publicly? That's the shit that excites me. Here's the biggest failure. The dream that I had when I started playing guitar and realized that I wanted to start playing in bands, it never happened. And it's never going to. It's never going to. And a lot of that is fate. And it's out of my hands, so I don't beat myself up about it. But, you reassess what your dream is and what your goal is as you get bitch slapped around by reality, But the dream as a kid playing music, I was watching Metallica binge and purge, I was watching the Pantera home videos. I wanted to be in a band that was playing stadiums. You could play for 3 hours and not one person loses interest for a second. That you're making millions of dollars by writing the most badass heavy metal songs that you can come up with and not compromising one bit for anybody. Say whatever you will about Metallica. They were writing music for themselves. They were writing the fucking music that meant something to them. They always have. Always have. Whether it's Lulu or Saint Anger or whatever. They, as artists, they maintain their integrity, period. Period, man. They're doing it for the love of it, you know? I wanted that. I wanted to be a guy like James Hetfield or a guy like Phil Anselmo. Fuck worrying about paying your bills. I want to live in like a mansion. I want to buy a fucking 1967 Mustang and crash that thing into a goddamn cliff or something. You know, that's the dream, man. Like millions of dollars, all that. That's never going to happen. It's never, and I'm not a defeatist. I hate that shit. I hate people that are down on themselves and nihilists and self-defeating. Fuck all that. I am a realist. That shit's never going to happen. So I readjusted. I just kept readjusting. Eventually you realize that these external things, you cannot think about them at all because it'll drive you crazy. Comparing yourself to others or seeking material rewards for your efforts, it's just going to fucking ruin you, right? But I reached a point in those terms where I'm like, okay, my new dream is that I can write music, record music, play music, pay my bills. So here's another huge failure. There has not been a single year of my life where those things alone have paid my bills. Writing songs, recording songs, playing songs. There has, you know, I've done okay certain years, but there has never even been a single year where doing those things paid my bills. That is a fucking failure. That is a monumental failure that I deal with every single day. Again, I can't beat myself up because what are the things that matter? It's what I said about Friedkin. He made the art that he wanted to make the way that he wanted to do it without, there was a lot of collaboration and compromise, especially between him and Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist. But there wasn't compromise in the sense of compromising your integrity or your vision or your beliefs or your spirit. He never did that. And for somebody operating at that level of Hollywood to manage to do that is just astounding. And I can say I've done the same. Obviously, the stakes are not as high, nowhere near as high. I'm not raking in like $1 billion for Sony Music. But still, man, that temptation is there for everyone at any level. Like, what do I got to do to do something that's going to pay the bills? Man, I don't even mention like make $1 billion, but just pay the bills. But I've realized I won't even do anything just to make that happen. Fuck it. I would rather die. I would rather die homeless, starving to death, or even worse, dependent upon someone else than compromise. And once you accept that in yourself, life gets a lot easier. And I realize that none of these things are real failures. The only failure would be to have totally given up. And ironically, Spirit Adrift came out of me basically giving up on trying to be like a full-time touring musician, that sort of thing. And out of that surrender came Spirit Adrift. So that's a weird conundrum there. But I have never totally given up. I have never written a song with anything in mind other than I love this. And I hope someone else does too. I do have that. I love this, and I really hope that somebody else is moved by this. That would be cool. Beyond that, I think it's so funny, people's conspiracy theories about bands signing to bigger labels and like, oh, watch, he wrote this song because he's on Century Media. I've seen that written about other bands. I think it's been written about me as well. anybody that knows me personally or professionally knows that you can't tell me shit. If anything, I've gotten even more impossible to, I will not be moved on certain things, you know, and I like cooperating with people and collaborating with people, but not in a way that's ever going to compromise who I am. I'm even more entrenched in that now than I ever have been. On the Sorcerer versus Star Wars thing, nothing coming out these days compares to what was coming out in 73. And this is not a, oh, things were better in my time thing, because I was negative 15 years old in 1973. And there's some strong objective evidence of this. I mentioned it earlier. Corporations own fucking everything. Disney owns Star Wars now. Oh, Friedkin turned down a producer stake in Star Wars because he thought he was goofy as hell. There's another failure. Corporations own everything. I was talking to a dear friend of mine. I would consider him a coworker too as well. I'm going to leave him nameless, but we were speaking on how even underground metal, largely, $20 spin is an exception here, but largely underground metal even is corporate owned at this point. There's a big tech company owns Nuclear Blast. They're only interested in streaming. Sony owns a couple metal labels, few. There is no interest by these big corporate conglomerates in artwork. It's product. It's product. There is no interest on behalf of politicians to help the common man because they are owned by corporations and it's all product. It's all bottom line. We are the product. And I don't know how to fix that, but we've got to. We've got to. Every once in a while, the good guys will win. You know, a band like Turnstile will blow up and have like a huge commercial crossover. You know, Metallica, it happened to them in the 80s. Pantera, it happened to them in the 90s. Mastodon. But it is more impossible than it's ever been because we are living in one big ass McDonald's. Amazon is getting into the merch fulfillment business. They have purchased a bunch of direct to garment machines so that bands, instead of using independently owned merch store like Holy Mountain or Night Shift Merch, shout out to both of them, doing great work. For a small fee, you can have Amazon fulfill your merch orders. This is frightening shit, man. Meanwhile, the human race is drowning, burning to death. And they got us arguing about Bud Light and shitty country songs. Man. So no lack of inspiration for metal songs. All right, I'm going to talk about Morbus, Chron, Sweven, whatever it is. This came out in 2014. I talked a lot about marketing and timing. Black Breath had already kind of tried to do the old school death metal sort of hardcore influenced crossover revival, right? And through fate and circumstances largely beyond their control, it fizzled out, which is unfortunate because I still think they're the best in a lot of ways. So that had already sort of happened. This came out in 2014. If it had come out a little bit earlier or a little bit later, be a different story. I ask myself a lot, if Master of Puppets or Sabbath Bloody Sabbath came out today, the modern version of those records, would anybody know it? And unfortunately, I think probably not. And, you know, but a lot of times these things are a bigger deal in retrospect. The charlatans and the false idols and the poser artists who are shallow and just hacks are worshipped by the culture in the moment, and the real geniuses aren't appreciated until later. Sometimes that does happen. And I'm sure there was some asshole who gave Master of Puppets a 7 out of 10 when it came out, and probably jumped off a fucking building 10 years later. But that being said, I think if Master of Puppets or Dark Side of the Moon or something like that came out today, most people wouldn't know it. because they've been brainwashed by corporations and influencers and hacks. You worship false idols. And I think Morbus, Chron, Sweven, whatever it is a perfect example of this. It had one diehard believer, Philip at Century Media, who is a diehard Spirit Adrift believer as well. And that makes me feel really good, because it's hard to look at my own stuff objectively and know if it's meaningful or dog shit. But I can listen to this record and know that it is tapping into the depths of the cosmic, artistic well of human life. You know, there's something really remarkable about it. It has that in common with the works of Friedkin and these artists that I've mentioned. There is a depth to it that transcends logic or intellectual reasoning. There's like a familiarity to it, as if you've experienced it in a dream or a past life or an alternate universe or something like that. There's outer and inner space being explored. Obviously, there's some bands like really benefiting from that aesthetic and vibe right now. And I love and respect these bands, and the big one in particular being Blood Incantation, obviously. I have so much fucking respect for that band. The way that they operate, they track live to tape, like really making music to move themselves and to communicate some deeper truth to their audience, right? Morbus, Chron was like ahead of the curve on that, and it just came out and went away. And the main guy, you know, he sort of pivoted into a new project called Sweven. Somebody fucking tell me how to say this, please. And that one, I was reading so the record he made after this one, equally profound, if not more. And I was reading reviews of it, and it's like 4 out of 5. Man, it's pretty like confusing. So again, like if Master of Puppets came out today, these fucking charlatans, worshipers of false idols, and sheep who are just their whole fucking existence is being dictated by basically an insidious subconscious marketing campaign. They give the most brilliant fucking piece of work that's come out in decades a fucking 3.5 out of 5 or whatever, 7 out of 10. Right? So we got to do something, man. I'm trying my best here. I think that's it. Yeah, I think I did it. Shit. Man, that's the hardest podcast I've ever done. I really hope that people made it through this one, because, man, that was, I did like 45 minutes of this. Some dickhead pulled up in our driveway. I don't even know what he was doing. My dogs went ballistic, and I had to fucking start over, man. I had to start over because I just don't want to edit these. You know, Friedkin operated off of intuition, and he shot what he saw. He didn't try to over-intellectualize it or figure it out. And man, as a tribute to him, I was trying to do the same thing with this shit. I just wanted to go and hope that it worked. We got a new record, Ghost of the Gallows, coming out on Friday. Please check it out. Man, I don't know. Buy it if you like it. Buy it if you want more than just these fucking dime a dozen cookie cutter Marvel movies and fucking all these bands that the frontmen say and do exactly the same shit to kick off the most uninteresting, uninspired bullshit you've ever heard. It's all cookie cutter. It's corporate fucking nonsense, man. It's McDonald's. It's fucking Walmart, right? Hopefully the record that me and the guys just made isn't that. And if you like it, fucking buy it and come see us live and pester people. Tell people who you think are sick of all this same old bullshit to check us out. Come see us with Paul Bear and Wake. You want to talk about exploring the infinite psychic depths. Shout out Outer Heaven. Yeah, come see us with them. Come see us at Metal Injection. Subscribe to this shit. Like it. Dude, rest in peace, William Friedkin. Watch the documentary Leap of Faith. It will change your fucking life. Listen to his autobiography if you don't have the time to read it. If you have the time to read it, please do. And let's fucking change the world. Let's save the world, man, from this soulless fucking bullshit. All right. This has been my favorite episode of Big Riff Energy. I'll see you next time. Cheers, y'all.